Great. So I'll just introduce myself really quick. My name is Samantha. I'm on the learning and development team here at GitLab, and I have a cool group of people today to talk about mental wellness for team members and what that looks like at GitLab and in an all remote environment. So my first question, and I actually want to ask this question first because I think that when we're having conversations about mental health, it can be difficult for anyone in the conversation or even like listening to the recording. So I'm hoping that this question can kind of build some like trust and safety for everyone on this call, but also anyone watching. So my question is, I'd love to hear a bit about the things that you do personally to when you're on PTO, the things you like to do to enjoy your time off. How do you recharge and rest? And then what impact that recharge and rest time has on the work that you do when you return from PTO. And it looks like, Taylor, you're the first one up in the doc. So do you want to share?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, with PTO, I think it's a really interesting concept here that I actually saw a tweet that I shared in our mental health channels that you don't ever really stop working, even when you're on PTO. Like, we're always thinking about work. And so it's one of those where I think you've really got to frame that you've got to provide time for yourself to really set that stuff aside. That can look like any different thing, really, whatever you enjoy. I think for doing this in a company, it really comes down to trusting people where you can actually be open and vulnerable and let people know sort of where you're at so that they can help you check out. This is something that I don't feel like you can really pull out of people. You have to volunteer it. It's where having channels internally where people can share their experiences, I think really help. It's one thing to, have those feelings and have them to yourself. It's another thing to see that other people are also struggling with those same things. Here at GitLab, we have channels that cross lots of interests, personal, professional, et cetera. And it's a way for you to sort of connect with employees and see that you're not the only one struggling with things. It helps people sort of become more open and more trusting of each other. Seeing someone you look up to who maybe has recently gotten a promotion or a bonus and see that like, oh, they're struggling with imposter syndrome. It makes it a lot more easy for you to understand that you're not alone and to take the time that you need to really sort of like get into a good space. So yeah.
I think thanks for that, Taylor. And I think for me, time off from work helps to make it relative. Like, it helps to remind you that your family and friends will still be here, work or no work. You're probably able to sustain yourself. You can get there's other activities and jobs that you derive joy from. And that it's easy if I've worked for many months, it's easy to kind of get annoyed at like a lack of progress or something like that. And I think zooming out and seeing the broader picture, when I then come back, I'm more kind of accepting of setbacks. So I think it makes me a better person after I come back. Darren?
So rest and time off are oftentimes portrayed as in competition with work, but I found that that's not actually the case. It very much complements work and provides space for better work. And I think it's really important at an organizational level to frame that rest and time off are productive. They are work. It's not like one is competing with the other. And I love this concept of the 4 stages of creativity: preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. So 2 of those, 50%, incubation and illumination, can only be activated through time off. This was actually outlined by a social psychologist a very long time ago. And I think that's really impressive and really good framework. The other thing I'll mention personally to the second half of your question, PTO enables me to focus more on the long term. So when I feel like when I'm working, it's a bit more short term. What are the near term tasks? PTO helps me focus on long-term life, long-term work. And I found that innovation rarely happens in a pressure cooker. Innovation requires space. and PTO provides space. I also think it provides an opportunity to find the yin to your proverbial yang, whether that's being creative outdoors. For us, that's the opposite of looking at a screen all day. So that's usually my go-to.
So I want to quickly respond to Darren here, because I think this is something that really resonates with me personally. I recently up and moved from Austin, Texas to Montana to be able to ski more. This past ski season, I skied 62 days, which most of my coworkers have not realized. And it's where if I've got 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day, I will go ski. And that time to just sort of let go and have a minute of exercise, have a minute of looking at beautiful mountains, super inspiring. I solved a lot of problems that I've been struggling with for months here at GitLab, with just like how the pieces of a problem fit together. And it's one where I think, because we are a remote company, because we have the friends and family first approach, because we are async, you're able to go and do that. So you don't even necessarily have to take PTO. Go for a walk in the middle of the day, go ski in the middle of the day, go hang out with your family in the middle of the day. There's time for you to sort of get away. And like I mentioned before, work looks like a lot of different things, and you're always thinking and sort of working through those problems. And that's something that for me has been really impactful joining GitLab.
I was just adding to the doc. I just wanted to like reinforce. I love that point what you just said, Taylor, about like, it doesn't mean it's not taking PTO, right? It's walking away from your computer to like break up and find that rest throughout the day. So thanks for calling that up. So the second question, I think, is really about like enablement of this culture at GitLab. And so the question is, how can managers and also just like other individual contributors and leaders at GitLab support and encourage team members who are working on like critical time-sensitive projects to do this? How do we encourage each other to take time off and to take care of ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's very important that you tell people about your own time off. If you're a leader at the company, I try to like share when I'm taking time off. I'm trying to share pictures. The leadership sets the tone, and it looks like I'm just sharing holiday pictures and annoying everyone. But what I'm sending is, the message I'm sending is, look, the potentially busiest person in the company can find time to take time off. So can you. And then I think in one-to-one interactions with your reports, I think it's, if you suspect that someone hasn't planned a vacation, it's okay if you can find the right tone, ask them if they've planned anything. If they say yes, you don't ask like when, you say awesome. And if they say no, it's like, hey, good, consider planning. If you don't plan vacations ahead, they get harder to take. So it's better to plan them. Samantha?
Yeah, you saying how you share it in Slack made me think a few weeks ago, I saw you mention in CEO channel in Slack that you were going offline for the rest of the day, and the like emoji reactions to that comment where it's like party parrot, and like everyone was like so excited to like see you post that. So I think it's just like evidence that it works when you share that you are going offline.
Yeah, I love that. I will echo publicly announcing your PTO, especially if you're a people leader. We should normalize being just as excited about announcing PTO as we do announcing work. We're all very proud of the results that we drive. We should also be very proud that we're managing our time well enough that we make time for PTO. That's something that you should be proud of. One thing that I've tried this year is I've planned preemptive potential PTO weeks for the full year. So if you look at my calendar, I actually have weeks booked 8 months from now that say potential PTO. And the reason they're there is, as time gets away from you, if someone asks me to do a webinar or a meeting months down the road, I can scan forward and I'll see that week. And it makes me think, well, if I book this here, I've massively disrupted this potential PTO. And you just want that forcing function of making yourself think, do I really want to do this? Am I going to formalize this as a time away? The third thing I'll say is we use PTO by Roots. It's a Slack plugin. It provides reports. And so you can very easily see across your team, are people taking PTO? And to Sid's point, if you see that some aren't, it's a great way to bring it up in a one-to-one and foster that conversation. Some people do need you to encourage that. The last point I'll make here is focus time when you are at work on scaling yourself and your knowledge via the handbook. GitLab is super unique in this, in that we can put our institutional knowledge down on the web. And so my goal as a manager is to have a robust enough handbook section that section plus someone asking questions in a public channel, in the remote channel, for example, that would be enough for them to iterate on my work and move it at least a little bit forward while I'm out. And one thing that I do when I set up my PTO is, instead of designating one person in my absence, you can designate a whole channel. And so I designate a public channel, our remote working channel, so that number one, the whole channel gets notified when I'm taking time off and going back to publicly announcing. But also, this is a great way to share questions in public and encourage more public conversation versus direct one-on-ones. And you never know, somebody that doesn't even work on your team could help answer that question if it lands in a public channel versus a DM to someone else on your team.
That's great. And I think talking about documentation is a really great transition to this third question. So, okay, we've talked about like going on PTO, encouraging people how to do more PTO, to go on PTO. And now I want to talk about how you transition back into work after taking time off. So I put a little note in here about like things I've noticed about when people come back from time off. They'll usually set their Slack channel as like digging out from to-dos, or that like silly typing cat or typing Kermit the Frog emoji that indicates like, I'm kind of going crazy over here, right? There's like so much to catch up on. And I linked in the doc a section in our handbook that mentions how using documentation can ease anxiety, right? Kind of like alluding to that same thing you were just saying, Darren, about like, if it's there, people can continue iterating when you're gone. So that, to wrap all of that up, my question is, how do you transition back into work after taking time off?
So this is an area that has always been hard for me. I have in my career just always never taken time off. I've had managers go and turn off my email to force me to go and take time off. That actually is a really good strategy, I will say. And it's one trick that sort of taught me, like, I'm just going to delete my inbox. When I get back, it doesn't matter, especially at a company like GitLab or Async. Everything's documented anyway. There's a history in the issues. There's a history in my pings on GitLab. Like, I don't need my email to tell me what to go and work through. And it's one of those where you've probably heard the adage that if it's important, it will come back, and it will. The next comment that someone makes on an issue, it'll get brought back. You can jump to it. It'll have the full history of what you missed while you were out. So just delete it. Like, don't stress yourself out with an inbox of 150 automated emails from GitLab. I struggled with this at previous companies with, thousands of emails from Jira, or just so many Slack pings. I mean, Darren talked about PTO by Roots. If you set that up correctly, it's a great way to just let people know that you're out, and they seem to be more willing to actually jump in. And then you got the documentation pages and the issues. It's very easy to people just like, oh, you want to know the strategy of Taylor's product area? Like, hey, here's the direction page. Go read it. Or a handbook link, or an issue, or an epic. Like, all of that ties itself together. So I would say just delete it. Delete the inbox. It'll come back.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem, like digging out of email. I want to second what Taylor says. If it's important, it will come back. I no longer check my email. Now, I'm in a very fortunate position. I have EBAs and a chief of staff team to support me, but I do email once a day at the end of the day. And if there's something super urgent, an EBA will ping me. That happens about 2 times a day. it allows me to not constantly get interrupted. And we're losing some cycle time because of that. But I think that we should be more disciplined about like how frequently we let ourselves be interrupted. I started to do the same with Slack, where I check my DMs, but all the other kind of responses I check once a day and do it in bulk. So very supportive. Darren?
I try to take one extra day off, even when I'm back. I'm just off, so that there are no meetings and no expectations to reach me. It really enables me to reacclimate in peace. And the other thing I would recommend here is when you come back, you've just had this time off. Hopefully there's been some space for innovation where you're in charge of your thoughts instead of things being pushed into your workflow. Put those down as fast as possible. When you sit down, don't let your inbox or Slack be the first thing that shows up. Open up a new GitLab issue or a Google Doc and just write down whatever it is that you found important during your time off, so that you re-enter work taking charge of what you think will add value instead of everyone else's workflows coming to you. Now, of course, you'll need to get to those eventually, but what I found is if you don't write that stuff down right away, you just get inundated with everyone else's and then you never do it. And you kind of lose some of that benefit of having time off. So take pride in, I'm going to start with a blank canvas after coming back. I'm going to write down things that I want to get to that I think will drive value, and then slowly acclimate back. This is doubly true for parents, by the way. I'm a relatively new dad, and this day after is I'm double recommended for parents.
I love that. I also just wanted to add to kind of like tagging on to what Sid was saying about managing interruptions. I think that just like speaks really well to our ability to manage our mental health and burnout in general. For me, interruptions prevent me from doing deep work, and I feel the best at work when I'm doing deep focus work. And so when interruptions take me away from that, I start to feel like I'm not contributing at my best, and I feel like I'm just not doing my best at work, and that impacts my mental health. And so I think managing interruptions when you come back from PTO and just on a daily basis, I think all these strategies are really helpful. Okay, so we can move on to this next question. So moving away from PTO, I'm going to take some time to talk about how setting realistic expectations can have an impact on our mental wellness. We have a section in the handbook about setting realistic expectations as a strategy for this management, this wellness management. And so my question is, how have you seen teams change the way they set goals or OKR since the pandemic has started? And what strategies can managers use when they are trying to set realistic expectations as this like preventative mental wellness tool?
So I've got a framework I use. I have a giant stack of sticky notes here that I use every morning. I sit down and I write down the things that I want to get done. I have a rule that only 3 things on this piece of paper are going to get done in any given day. And those are the top 3 priorities for me. And if it's not on this sticky note, it's not going to get done. And this works like across time horizons too. I do this daily. If something needs to happen on this list that doesn't happen, it goes into the reminders notes on my computer, which is something I do weekly. And there are 3 things that are at the top of that list that are for the week that need to get done. It works with months, quarters as well. This also works with teams. When I joined GitLab, I found that the team that I joined was just overwhelmed with lots of requests and lots of things to do. And it was a lot of juggling. And I said, look, we can't do this. We need to focus. We have 3 projects. That's all we're going to do every single release. If there are more than 3, it's going to go to the next release. And so if you look at our static analysis planning issues, there are 3 product initiatives that we're working on. And if it doesn't fall into that bucket, it'll go maybe next release. So I think that's a strategy you can use to really help sort of reduce I have a million things to do. No, I have 3 things to do at any given time. My team has 3 things that they're focused on at the moment. And if it's not one of those 3 things, it's not getting done. And it's an easy way to communicate what you're focused on. And if it's not on that list, don't set an expectation that it's going to get done.
Thanks for that. I think the question also was like, how did the pandemic affect this? And I think we backed off from some KPIs. Normally, we try to drive key performance indicator, like better, better, better every quarter. And one that comes to mind is the MR rate, how many merge requests we get done a month, compensated for kind of the size of the team. And normally we try to push that higher, but due to the pandemic and people being worried about their health, the health of their loved ones, people having to take care of kids at home, we decided to not push on that for the duration of the pandemic. Darren?
Yeah, one thing that we did, kind of going back to an earlier point, that rest and time off are productive and in some ways are a piece of work. We actually wove space into OKRs to focus on career development and planning, so that it was a piece of work to actually talk about that and not just something you fit in around the rigid confines of work. And with a lot of people going through a lot of things, having the ability to look into the future and think about where you want to be was really refreshing, like extra refreshing during the pandemic. And I'm still working on how to actually articulate this, but I try to weave space for innovation into OKRs wherever I can. I have this belief that space is not necessarily a lack of focus. Space is the strategy. There are some things that will only happen if you have that space. And there's this formula called Kingman's formula. So if you want to get really geeky about it, there is some fascinating science behind Kingman's formula that essentially boils down to being pre-booked at 100% is a massive operational risk. And this can feed into how you plan OKRs as well.
Super interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Darren. So at GitLab, we have a Slack channel called Mental Health Aware, and this article that I'm going to ask the next question about was shared by a team member earlier this week. It was called Work from Home Paranoia. And just like my quick synopsis of the article, if you haven't read it, is essentially because of the pandemic, we've been spending a lot of time at home, a lot of time probably by ourselves or with the same group of people. We're also working from home, and all of that kind of like decrease in the people that we're seeing and spending time with has had an increase on our sense of paranoia. So it might look like you're misinterpreting situations, or you aren't assuming positive intent, you're seeing negative meaning in conversations, and it's impacting this feeling of paranoia at work. So my question is, how do you think communication styles in an all remote company contribute to or fix this feeling of paranoia at work? And I actually have the first response to my own question that I want to call out to. Just recently, I took the Crucial Conversations training. And in Crucial Conversations, one of the things that they teach is mastering your story, which is like stopping yourself from using opinions to build a story that's not accurate. And to me, reading through this article really made me think about how, as individuals, if we can focus on facts and master our story, we have there's truth in what's happening, and we prevent paranoia or anxiety about what we think is happening. And instead we're saying, no, this person said this, they meant that. They didn't mean whatever I'm telling myself that they meant. So I just think that I wanted to call out that Crucial Conversations is something that a lot of us use at GitLab and have been trained on or read the book about. And I think there's a really strong connection here.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm glad you brought up Crucial Conversations. I think there's one as well, the Radical Candor Framework that went around a few years ago. I think the thing to remember about both of those frameworks is they have to be rooted in trust. And that's not something that's super straightforward for people to do, especially at a remote company. I mean, I joined in January before the pandemic. I have not met my manager. I have not met anyone on my direct team. And we had to establish that trust to be able to really have working relationships. This is one where you lean into the values that we've got. If you look at our collaboration values on our handbook page, there's a lot of great tips and strategies for how to build trust with people, even if you haven't met them. But it really does just come down to recognizing people at a personal level, understanding that we all have lives outside of this, that you don't ever really know what's going on. I think it's really easy to think that you're the only person that has problems or struggles. And it's really easy to tune that out when, like, we're all dealing with something at any given time. So it's sort of see each other as humans, focus on those values, and get to know people. And I think that really helps cut through some of the worry or the misinterpretations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's essential to build trust, and I think it gets built through informal communication, getting to know, not through just the work, but getting to know the person. The more you know about a person, on average, you're going to like them more. You're going to have more positive interpretations of their actions, and you're going to have more understanding if they are off, if they do something that is not okay. You see them as a whole person and all their struggles. So I think informal communication is the key, and I think it's very easy in a all remote environment to not take the time for that. I think it's essential to do so, and I'm proud that this week I had a coffee chat with someone. Then I think we should keep allocating time to that. Darren?
Yeah, I can't say that much more succinctly. Agree with that. And if you don't have a regular routine of coffee chats, try to make it one. It's always very refreshing for me to have a chat with someone that I don't work with or that they live on a different continent. You really get re-energized by just getting to know someone that is potentially nothing like you.
Thanks. So still related to this same article, something that we have been talking a lot about on the L&D team and the people experience team recently is challenges that new team members face in onboarding, and how learning text-based communication can be something that's really new and difficult. And so we just kind of talked about like informal communication and how that feeds into avoiding paranoia at work. So now I'd like to talk about how can team members improve their async or text-based communication to increase clarity and expectations so we can avoid this paranoia feeling.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be explicit, especially from people from North America. They tend to assume that other people can also read between the lines. And we have people from all kinds of continents, countries, cultural customs, different backgrounds. So don't assume people can read between the lines. Be explicit, be succinct. Your messages have a higher chance of being read. If you find yourself going back and forth, even 1 or 2 times, just ask for a video call and consider recording that video call. So you can, if that other person is confused about something or you're confused, probably other people are. Darren?
Yeah, I'll call out our effective communication handbook page. There's a couple of video embeds in there and some great overview on how to communicate more effectively through text. This doesn't come naturally for everyone. I will say I have a background in editorial, so I love writing. So this comes very natural for me. But what I found in training new writers, because that's essentially what we're doing here, we're trying to build that writing skill, is to read. A lot of osmosis happens when you read great writing, whether that's business writing or the Journal of Organizational Design, for example, scientific research. The more that you read from great writers on how people have to convey very complex scenarios to other people, you learn things. Even if you don't realize you're learning them, you start to absorb what did they do and how did they communicate in a way that made sense to me or that taught me something new. And you can start to mirror that in your own communication.
That's great. Yeah, thanks. I hadn't thought about it that way before, Darren. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so this next question is, I'd like to ask if anyone can share their own definition of imposter syndrome and how you think being in an all remote environment contributes to imposter syndrome in a unique way. And I'd also just like to say that, like, if anyone is comfortable with sharing a time where they felt imposter syndrome, I think that could be really valuable, but that can be a vulnerable place. So no requirement to share your own experience. Yeah.
So I'll start. I think I suffered the most from this during one of my internships. And it was two things I think that contributed to it. I really prepared for the job interview really well. So I kind of nailed it. And I was not my authentic self. I kind of oversold myself. So when they hired me, I didn't feel they hired me, but kind of the persona I was selling them. So, and I think it would have been fine. I could have just been me, but that stuck with me. I wasn't frank about the weaknesses I have. So that was a big lesson. And then I joined that job, and then many people that were there had a kind of a social connection to each other. They all came from the same organization. So it was really, really hard to fit in because they had the same background, the same customs, and it kind of, they took pity on me and tried to string me along, but like they had years of experience together. And then what you're lacking is kind of positive reinforcement. And I think it ended up really badly. My manager left, and I found, and she presented in a meeting that I assume everyone already knows, but I'm leaving today, and I didn't know. And I felt like totally left out of the loop. And I was like her report. So that's why at GitLab, it's not okay to say, I assume people know, or obviously, or things like that. It can be really bad. And then the worst part of it is, she told people explicitly not to tell me, even though they were like, we can't do that. He needs to get a heads up. So it was like, it was a very messed up situation. But I felt very lonely. I was there in my cubicle, browsing the internet the whole day instead of doing anything productive. And it was a very miserable time in my life. I was also, I moved to another city that I really didn't like. And I think in an all remote environment, it tends to be harder to get kind of feedback on your performance. It's harder for people to find out that you're not happy. It's like a super cubicle, right? The walls are really high. Darren?
It's a great story and a great analogy. What I'll add here is that GitLab's sub-values, so the substantiators beneath our values, they really helped me defeat imposter syndrome. It's a continual process, but I would say, take a look at them through this lens if you haven't. So I'll start with 2. Sharing ideas in drafts. We have a sub-value that everything is in drafts. So like right away, I just feel like a weight leave my shoulders. Like, okay, things are in draft. I can handle that. And then paired with low level of shame. So we try to collaborate and work together with a very low level of shame. So already the stakes of that are much lower, and there's a level of psychological safety that comes with that. So you can kind of canvas the organization and say, hey, we're sharing things in draft. We have a low level of shame. Why should I have an imposter syndrome? Those are 2 that I really appreciate. The other one that I'll point out here, or a way of working that I'll point out here, is that you don't need to know everything. I actually love that we have a sub-value that says it's impossible to know everything. It says a lot in a few words. You just need to provide the forum for others to make your ideas better. So what I've seen is that leadership isn't about ideating all of the best ideas. I think a lot of imposter syndrome can come from this self-inflicted expectation that as a leader, you have to ideate all the best ideas. But really, leadership is just creating trust such that other people will help up level your ideas and fill your weaknesses and voids. So taking one step further, I specifically hired direct reports who thrived in areas that I was weak in or that weren't necessarily life-giving for me. So we had specifically had these conversations in the interview. Like, I want you to be better at this than me so that our team as a whole gets up leveled. And so I would say, look beyond yourself, look at your team. That helps with imposter syndrome when you take it off of one person and think, what are we doing to make the team stronger?
So for me, this was the topic of my contribute session that was recorded and turned into a blog post on our GitLab blog. So go check that out if you want to hear more about my story. But basically, like, I've got a theater and dance degree. Now I work in high-tech cybersecurity. That gives me a source of imposter syndrome every single day. I think the root of imposter syndrome really is just the feeling of insecurity despite objective and evident success. And I think for me, coming to GitLab actually has helped me combat that, in that we've got a lot of open conversations. We've got our mental health channel. We've got places where you can see that you're not the only one struggling with those. And then we've framed a lot of our daily working. Darren, you touched on some of those items. But even in our promotion process, which I went through earlier this year, you write down all the things you've achieved. And it's one of those like, wow, I did all of that? Like, okay, I must know what I'm doing then. And those documents become public. You can see everyone else's. And it's one of those like, it provides the objective and the evidence to prove that your feelings of insecurity are just completely made up and in your head.
That, Taylor, you sharing that about the creation of a promotion doc also makes me think about a training. I actually wasn't a part of it, but the women TMRG at GitLab hosted a series called the I Am Remarkable training, which I think is from some training from Google. They put it on here. And part of that training was this session where the participants shared things they were remarkable at, things that, things that they were great at, things that they had achieved. And from what I heard from the people in that training, that was like one of the most powerful pieces of the training, was just taking time to recognize and see like, oh yeah, I actually am really good at that. Like, I'm supposed to be here. I'm doing good work. So I wanted to share that. Okay, and I want to just be conscious of time. So I think we have time for one final question. And the question is, how can the nonlinear workday be used as a tool to manage burnout?
I think burnout comes from a lack of control to kind of achieve objectives. And I think a nonlinear workday helps you, kind of gives you back control. Taylor mentioned go skiing during the day. If you're not feeling like it, you can do something else. I think most people at GitLab work enough hours. So I think it's really important as a company, we emphasize, like, you don't have to feel bad. You don't have to feel like you're cheating if you spend office hours doing something non-work related. And it's always funny when the company was smaller and people joined, it wasn't obvious to them. So they posted, I'm going on a lunch break for 30 minutes now. And then everyone's like, that's great for you, but like, don't feel the need to post. We're not checking whether you're online. And I think we've been able to keep that, where I don't hear managers say, oh, that person is not online or offline enough. I think that we hold each other accountable for results, but not hours in seat, because I think that's really destructive for, if you start measuring hours in seat, you're going to get that, but that's actually not what the company needs, and it's not going to make people happy. And there's bigger priorities in life, including your own health and those of your family and friends.
Yeah, I actually think nonlinear workdays are far more feasible and practical in an all remote environment. compared to a co-located environment. Number one, there's no office that acts as this epicenter of power, like the clock that rules all other clocks. So it really reinforces that time is very relative. It may be 10 a.m. for someone on this call, but it's also 10 p.m. So although you're quote unquote leaving in the middle of your workday, it's actually not. That's actually the end of the workday if you were in a different time zone. So it really helps reframe the mentality that you aren't taking anything away from a workday if you leave in the middle of the day, because that's just relative, especially at our scale when you have people in 65 countries. It's always a certain time somewhere. And that's a really refreshing way to look at it. The other thing that I'll mention here is the nonlinear concept really enables you to have a constant way out if you feel cornered or stuck on any piece of work. For a lot of people that are working a rigid schedule, you simply say, well, the rest of the day is shot. I have to force myself to sit here and stew on this until the clock hits a certain hour, and then I'll just try again tomorrow. But when you recognize that time is very precious, you're very thankful for Taylor's earlier example of being able to ski 62 days. Like, you'll never get those 62 days back. So you're really glad that you did it when you had the opportunity. And we actually have a really interesting conversation in our neurodiversity channel on this, where for some people, it's very difficult to do this, or it works against their peak productivity. So this definitely isn't for everyone, but I'll point out the concept of a manager of one. For this to really work well, you have to really manage your schedule to a point where you prioritize this skiing in the middle of the day so that other work or other people's schedules don't always override what you want or need to do in the middle of the day. So there will be friction. If you want to go skiing for 3 hours in the middle of your day, potentially there's friction. You might have to compromise and something gets pushed or deferred, and that's okay. You have to prioritize what matters most for you for your long-term mental health and productive health.
So I'll just say, like, for me to be able to ski, that was the reason I joined GitLab. Like, that was strategically why I came to this company, to have the remote work, to have the async schedule, to have things done in writing. And I'm glad you mentioned that we're a global company and in 65 plus countries, because that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed. I'm personally a night owl. I do my best thinking at 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. And so I save a lot of that deep thinking or writing for those hours. And it just happens that that also lets me overlap with Australia and APAC. And I get to work with the sales team and my technical writer who live there. And so it is kind of a reframing of, I'm not delaying my work or like avoiding my work. Instead, I'm shifting it so I overlap with other team members. I also get to ski during the day, and that refuels me. And so all of that together creates like a really positive way for me to frame why I want to do and set my own schedule on my own terms. And that, I think, really turns work into something that you look forward to. I look forward to working with my Australian counterpart, with my APAC sales team. That's not something I get to do every single day. And if I also get to ski too, like, yeah, for sure. Like, I'm having an awesome day.
That's great. Thanks, Taylor. Thank you all. That is the last question that I have today. So yeah, just thanks all for showing up for this conversation and normalizing the conversation about mental wellness at GitLab. I really appreciate all of your time.
Thanks for organizing.